Hi, everybody. David Noor back with you with my business partner and head of our revenue operations, Jen Cords. Hello, Jen.
Good morning, Noor. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. Nice to see you. And for our audience, this is our RevOps weekly live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and we turn this also into a podcast. So if you haven't had a chance to listen or catch any of our live sessions, would encourage you to jump in with your questions, your comments, as we talk through really accelerating revenue growth. So in each of the episodes, we take a facet of a thought leadership space. We take a facet of marketing technology, sales technology, customer service technology, the overarching revenue operations, and kind of really discuss the challenges and the opportunities we're seeing in the market with both existing clients, but also some really interesting conversations. I would encourage you, again, this is for your benefit, to jump in with your questions, with your comments, as you kind of go through this content with us. So, Jen, let me start with you, and for our audience, if I've never heard of revenue operations, give us an overview of what is RevOps.
Sure. So revenue operations is the cohesive umbrella that encompasses your marketing, sales, and customer success technologies, people, and processes to take interests from your website or anonymous visitors all the way through opportunities to closed won or closed lost revenue.
And how mature would you say is the RevOps field in the market today on a scale of 1 to 10? 1, nobody knows what it is. 10, everybody's all over it.
I would say it's in the middle, just because it's an evolving space, and the unification of the disparate operations teams, market ops, sales ops, customer success ops, joining them all together is sort of in an evolutionary process right now. And everyone is kind of doing it differently. So there's not one way to do it, and there's not a dedicated framework of how it fits into any organization.
And again, I'm always looking for like who's the one neck to choke, right? Who's the person most responsible? Where within an organization, it sounds like it's more than just marketing. Obviously, it's more than just sales, more than customer success. So organization wide, who owns the structure? Where should RevOps fit?
In an ideal situation, RevOps actually stands alone. It should be thought of like your data and analytics team or your BI team. Like it's a standalone function. Who it rolls up to, right now it's kind of varying within the space. Some people have it rolling up to your CMO, some to your CRO. Others are putting it actually under finance, because that's usually where data also lives. So it's still trying to find its footing on exactly where it fits in an organization. But at the end of the day, yes, it's trying to create a one neck to choke, if you will, one responsible group over the entire life cycle, versus having silos in the various departments that actually become counter intuitive.
Got it. So I'm going to share my screen. And again, another benefit of joining us live or joining us for the visual version of this as well is I want to show, and we're going to talk about a good amount of research we've embarked on in conversations, again, with existing customers, with other thought leaders in the space around this customer lifecycle maturity model. For our audience, I'm also completely rewriting my best-selling book, Relationship Economics. And it's the one over my shoulder, and it'll be released later this year. And an entire chapter on automation and AI and ML and where and how we can automate some of these relationship touches. So we're doubling down on this notion that most SaaS-oriented, most recurring revenue business models got to create some sort of a digital on-ramp, create awareness. Awareness leads to engagement. There might be a product on-ramp from like a freemium model, if you will, that leads to evaluation, ultimately leads to purchase. So the customer says, I like it, I need it, I'm going to buy it. I often we tell clients the relationship really starts when they buy, because now you have to really focus on adoption. And if you do that, enablement, training, implementation well, by the way, that could add additional users, additional consumption, if you will, that then leads to impact. And that impact, do that part well, deliver on the value proposition, it really leads to advocates and evangelists, which then really propels them full circle in this approach. So Jen, in looking at that maturity model, you talk to a lot of clients about your accelerated time to close. Give our audience an overview of this process.
Sure. So the accelerated time to close process is a 5-step foundational methodology that my team takes all of our clients through. And we start with a baseline audit because we need to know what exists within a tech stack, how is it all connected, where are our gaps, and where are quick solutions to make improvements. Then beyond that, we build into the buyer profiles, needs, and behaviors to actually look at what are people engaging with, what's resonating, what should we be doubling down on, if I could speak today. And then also making sure that our marketing is targeting the right people to grow and amplify that demand. And so then after that, we also then look at user journeys. We set an ideal path that each of those buyer personas and profiles should take, or we think they would take, and make sure that there's content to support that journey. And then beyond that, we look to improve and optimize. So we go back and we look at the data. We look at closed loss reasons. We create a feedback loop throughout this entire process that sales can give feedback to marketing on what is or is not working. And then that allows us to fine tune the process and those user journeys. And then beyond that, the 5th step is to then scale the breadth and depth of both the tech stack as well as the complexity of our processes. So maybe that's including an additional technology that can do some of the AI and automation behaviors, or it's modifying the enrichment or nurture tracks that we also have, and maybe possibly adding scoring to weed out things that we don't actually want to pay attention to. So that 5th step is really just the scale and amplification.
So if I go back to the maturity model, sounds like accelerated time to close is really focused on foundationally the left-hand side, right? The awareness, the engagement, evaluation, and purchase. What has to happen for the organization to really succeed with a accelerated time to close type process on the right-hand side? How does RevOps become an enabler of 5, 6, and 7?
Sure. Yeah. So for RevOps to work best, there needs to be clean handoffs between the purchase or the sales team and then your customer success team, and making sure that just because somebody's purchased, the conversation doesn't end. So having a clean handoff, making sure that there's a repeatable, scalable process for adoption and onboarding a customer. And then how do we help them realize their initial growth and impact? And then also just make sure that they're seeing the value of the tool. And that may be ongoing training, that may be hooking them with the solutions architect team, and just having those ongoing conversations versus just one time a year when the renewal needs to come around. So making sure that it's a complete loop.
So in this episode, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're talking about the accelerated time to close, and very specifically the second phase. So you and your team go in, you do a baseline assessment, a baseline audit to understand where the organization is in terms of their capabilities, their processes, their tech stack. Talk about this kind of critical, what seems to be a really critical second step of really sales qualification, but really understanding the buyer and the buyer behavior, buyer needs. Talk about kind of what happens in this second phase.
I would actually take the second phase back a step. It's not necessarily the sales qualification yet. It's also marketing qualification, because we want to make sure that we're talking to the right people and drawing that attention from the right groups of people. So it's both an alignment between sales and marketing to understand who sales actually wants to talk to, and then having marketing target those people with appropriate messaging, with appropriate content. And so it's making sure that both teams are working in lockstep. And it is really important because historically, you've always heard like marketing generates a whole bunch of leads and then throws them over the wall to sales, and sales is like, no, I can't do anything with these, and marketing doesn't do anything. Like, what is the other team doing? And it's a lot of pointing fingers. And so having both teams be in alignment and be in that conversation to define what the profiles should be, it allows them to work more cohesively together, and then be able to have sort of a symbiotic relationship. When marketing gives sales something, they can then give feedback back saying, yes, this worked. No, this didn't work. That wasn't quite the right person. And then marketing can fine tune and try again. So it's a yin and a yang, if you will. And so, Nor, you talk to a lot of executives about their revenue growth. And what would you say is their biggest challenge that you've observed kind of defining what these profiles and needs should be?
Yeah, for our audience, I would really ask you to think about the different phases of a company's maturity, right? So early on, you've heard the classic case of, product market fit. Jen, I've seen, I know you have as well, a lot of clients who build a solution for a problem that doesn't exist, a problem that's not, my hair is on fire. It's a nice to, and I'll be able to get to it at some point. Or they're completely missing the boat on what the real problem is. So it's not what you think it is. It's these other things. And anytime you and I run into that, I keep thinking, well, who the heck went and talked to the buyers? Not my mother-in-law or your cousin, who are not buyers of this. But who did we go talk to and say, whether it's a CISO or that building owner, or that, a lot of our work is obviously B2B, but there's got to be that ideal customer. And if we don't go talk to them and really understand, forget our solution for a second. And just real quickly, you've heard the expression where attorneys say, don't lead a witness, right? I'm a big believer of don't tell it. If you have this, thinking about this problem and this appropriate solution, what would you do? You're leading the witness, right? So versus asking broadly, what are you doing in this space? How are you thinking about that space? What's the broader ecosystem you're struggling with? So if there's misalignment there, that's where you see a lot of, Jen, time, money, people, cycles, resources spent throwing darts at a moving target, right? And you wonder why we're not getting the deals is because you're completely missing the target. So let me ask you the same. Can you take us through the buyer profiles, the needs and behaviors, and what you and your team do in that second phase that's really so impactful?
Sure. So when my team first tries to define what the buyer profiles and needs are, it's around, well, what is the product? Who are they selling to? What sort of problems do they solve? And then who within all the various organizations then would be responsible for that? Is it the CISO? Is it a director level? Is it the solutions engineers that we need to talk to? And in most organizations, there's multiple buying groups. And so it's making sure that there's the appropriate layers to the communications that we're wanting to put out. So the really high level information, maybe for the C-suite, the more tactical stuff for the engineer, and making sure that it resonates. So it's evaluating who are we needing, who do our products solve problems for, and then creating a profile, like titles and general indicators of how to identify those people within the database.
So is that personas? Is that kind of really deeper dive on, this C-suite is going to have this type of an issue, and here's really what they're going to care about, and how do you then ensure? You said marketing qualification as well. How do you ensure that message resonates with that target persona?
It is defining the personas, and then how do you measure if it resonates is actually tracking the data. So when you do send out an email or make a post about a blog post or a resource paper, then measuring the engagement on that and look at the data, the titles that you're gathering from the form fills or the downloads or whatnot, who's clicking on your email. And so it is I don't want to say it's throwing spaghetti at the wall, but it is defining and drawing lines in the sand of this is who we think is who we should talk to, and then evaluating if that worked or not, and then fine tuning and then trying again.
So is this also where buyer intent comes in, and you really care a lot about kind of, and you alluded to earlier, how do they want to engage? What are they most interested in engaging? Is that kind of where that you're looking for insights in those different ideas or approaches you're testing?
Yes. Generating demand is kind of a misnomer. It's actually intercepting demand, because people are going to want to engage with your content on the platform and at the time of their choosing. And you need to make sure that the content is consumable wherever they choose to be, and that you are able to track those insights and understand what their challenges are. So having buyer intent tracking capabilities and looking at your anonymous web traffic is actually a really good indicator of what's resonating and who's looking for your solutions. So, nor turning it back to you, going to those buyer profiles, why do you feel it's such a critical phase? And also, where do you see executives maybe miss the boat?
Yeah, and again, for our audience, one of the things we've noticed during the pandemic, and a trend that I'm actually really bullish on, really believe it's going to stay with us, is that everybody that worked increasingly more virtually, and I want you to specifically think about buyers. Yeah, they became more available, but they also became busier, and we all put in more hours, and we all demands of us increased. So now that buyer you really want to engage has more on their plate, more demands of them for mind share, for wallet share. By the way, less about you. It's actually their internal organization. And their day-to-day job, right? So you're going to have increasingly, we believe, a smaller window to kind of get their attention, grab their attention, intrigue them, differentiate, position yourself, and really create. And Jen, you've heard me say this. You chuckle every time. I always say it's really tough to push a rope if you ever tried doing that.
Yes.
How do you create a hook? How do you create a pull? How do you create market gravity? So if you don't get this personas, if you don't get this buyer needs, buyer behaviors down, you're not really going to look through that window. And here's the key: at the time of their choosing and the device medium of their choice. So critical that you're there. I love your comment about intercepting kind of that need, because it could be that executives in bed with a tablet and is just looking at something, or it could be they're in their on their smartphone looking at something. So if you're not there, I believe, when they're interested, at their time of choosing, in their need, then I struggle to see how you make that short list. I struggle to see how you get on their radar and not get delegated or relegated to somewhere else. What's your thoughts on the critical nature of that whole buyer need, buyer behavior, kind of that whole buyer profile, if you will?
I would agree with your thoughts. And I would just also say that a lot of companies focus that awareness and engagement, the very top level of their funnel, on themselves. And they really need to spend more time on addressing the needs of who they're trying to attract and what problems can they actually solve, and how they communicate about their solution really needs to resonate, and the buyer needs to see themselves in that situation and in that problem, and then kind of have a light bulb aha moment that, oh my gosh, this could simplify so many things. And then they want to learn more, because everybody wants their life more simple. And so targeting it correctly is really important.
So as I like to say, is less about us, more about how they're better off because of us.
Yes, absolutely.
So then let me ask you, again, you and your team see a lot of teams, you see a lot of processes, you see a lot of capabilities and tech stacks. What are some of the best practices? Maybe give us 3 that you've observed in really alignment of the way we sell, especially early on, with the way that buyer buys?
I would probably say the biggest best practice is knowing your audience. Don't have a generic approach to everything. So define your journeys and define the people, the groups of people that need to be white gloved, and then the ones that you still want to talk to maybe eventually, but maybe aren't ready now, and they should have a different journey. And so you need to differentiate those two paths, and your buyer needs and profiles will really help with that. So that's one. Two is also, in previous conversations you and I have had, Nor, about not defining your required fields. And so if you don't have the data within your system, like titles or location, you're not going to be able to target your messaging appropriately. So knowing what data exists and having an enrichment strategy will really help you have a robust database to actually go after with your targeted messaging and the various levels of things. So that would be two. And then three is really having that feedback loop. If you don't have the information going back and forth between sales and marketing, you're missing very critical insights that only sales can give you, because they're your front line. They're the ones who are having the conversation with these prospects. And those insights are absolutely critical to the long-term viability of everything marketing is doing. So I would say those are probably the three best practices that most organizations should strive to achieve. And so then, related to that, Nor, where would you say those buyer needs and profiles become highly relevant to the executive teams and also leadership trying to elevate their revenue growth?
Yeah, so I like, you know me, I like collecting stories, I like sharing stories, and I'm reminded of an executive conversation I had, a chief revenue officer who regularly likes to go through a pretty in-depth deal review with his team. And this particular client used Medic, and for our audience, it's a really good process to inspect kind of your opportunities. And it asks a lot of questions like, do we understand, do we have an executive champion? Do we understand their buying process or decision process, decision criteria? And Jen, I keep thinking those deal reviews directly correlate back to how well we understand that buyer and that buyer persona. And I've sat through some of these where they're just painful because we don't have the information, or we're trying to sell an elephant to somebody who doesn't know what one is, has never been around one, doesn't understand what to do with one, doesn't need one, doesn't have a budget for it, just on and on and on. And you're like, you genuinely feel like you're having an out-of-body experience because somewhere along the way, somebody missed the boat by like 10 miles, right? So yes. Is it marketing that didn't understand? Is it sales that ignored marketing and decided to go to try to sell this to somebody that, it is such an uphill battle. And that becomes really omnipresent in deal reviews. We weren't as smart about kind of who we targeted, how we went after them. Why are we investing limited time, effort, resources with somebody who's clearly not a right fit for us? Or also deals that slip. If you think about a deal that slips from quarter to quarter, there's something we didn't do. There's something we didn't understand. There's something that wasn't aligned between our positioning or our qualification or the marketing position papers and invites to webinars and things they're getting from us that's just completely missing what they're looking for. So those are a couple of places that I've seen it. How about you? Where do you see it really manifest? Like, oh my gosh, are we talking about the same company and product and customer base, or we're talking about somebody completely different?
I would definitely say I've seen it in deal reviews. Like that is also a really critical part of the journey and part of that feedback loop. And I've also seen it when a lot of people have single-threaded deals. So to your point, when you're talking about things that are slipping, it may be that we didn't completely miss the boat, but we didn't make the right identification that the person we're talking to doesn't actually have the right authority to make the decision, or maybe they're the ones relaying the information to somebody else, and we really should bring that other person in to have a more robust conversation. So those deal reviews can provide great insights. The other place where I've seen it is also at renewal time, and with information that the customer success team gathers. Again, when accounts may be slipping or may be at risk of non-renewal, like those are times where we have obviously missed something very large. Maybe support tickets aren't being closed quickly, or maybe the customer feels ignored because we're not giving them the right amount of attention or the right amount of resources. Or maybe our process of onboarding them and giving them the additional help and education isn't robust enough. So customer success and sales both are great for those insights.
For our audience, if you just joined us, you're listening to Jen Cords. She leads our revenue operations practice. We're talking about a second phase in a process we call accelerated time to close. And the goal here is really a deep dive on the buyers, the buyer profiles, buyer needs, buyer behaviors. That includes personas, that includes their buying intent. And how do we much more effectively align the way we sell, the way we try to engage, the way we try to influence with the way they buy? Because again, if I'm trying all this effort, time, money, energy, and we're completely on opposite pages, it's just we're not gonna get anywhere. So on that note, and you started going down that path, Jen, what are top 3 pitfalls you've seen companies make in this phase, in this deeper, more intentional focus on buyer needs, profiles, behaviors?
Probably one of the biggest one actually comes from those deal inspections that we were talking about. Those deal inspections only being housed within sales, like not having marketing being involved, at least listening as a fly on the wall to those deal inspections, because marketing can gain great insights. Having at least a representative from like product marketing, your demand gen function in those meetings when sales is talking about why deals closed or didn't close, having them there, product marketing can get ideas to take back to engineering to make product improvements, or the demand gen team can understand, okay, we need to do better targeting. So that would be 1. 2 would be never reviewing and updating your buyer profiles and personas, just deciding that, nope, these are the lines in the sand. This is who we need to talk to, C-suites only, and going with that. The third one would also be not having the various journeys and assets to support those journeys. If you take everybody on the same path, you're shoehorning them into one way to get something done. And we all know that nobody follows the exact same path. They may be a CFO and they will all take 12 different ways to get to the same end goal. So you really have to have a robust library of assets to ensure wherever people want to go on that journey and what they want to learn at the time they want to learn it is really, really important.
Yeah, and that pitfall, you and I see that all the time. I have a question of you. We keep saying C-suite. We keep saying CISOs. Does every product and every service require that C-level? Because at some point, like I said, the ones I'm coaching, the ones I see, they don't have enough hours in the day. They're constantly pulled in so many different directions, and they tend to filter a lot more out than they kind of embrace. So does every product need to go to the C-suite? And if so, if not, then how do they navigate different buyer personas?
I would definitely say that most technologies don't need to go to the C-suite. There are applications that a C-level executive needs to understand to have the value understanding of what that tool does and why their team needs it. But actually getting into the minutia of how it works and why it works and all of that, that's really not a C-level need. And so a lot of companies target the C-level because they think they're the ones with the budget and the signatory power, which is true, but it's really, you need to communicate the value and what your product can solve to the VPs or the engineers or the tactical people who are going to be in your tool on a day-to-day basis, to make sure that they see the value and then can communicate it to their leader. And also during that process, making sure that when there are reports and the impact, and maybe it's you're saving cycle time, and all of that can be clearly communicated to the executive, because then he can say, well, we made this investment and here's our ROI on it, because they're interested in communicating that to the rest of the organization. But a selling motion to a C-level executive, I would say depends on size of organization, but the larger the organization, the less likely it is a C-level executive is going to be want to be in on those early conversations. So what advice would you give to your executive coaching clients, Nora? I mean, you alluded to it, that every client that you've talked to really doesn't want to be down in those weeds. But what advice would you give them on their sales qualification and implementation?
I want them to, and I coach my clients that not a whole lot happens in Mahogany Row. And by that, I mean the best asset you can bring to your organizations is often get out of your office and engage those executives, not even in a sales theater or sales motion, but get customer facing. So the sooner, regardless of, and Dennis Sadlowski is a friend and former CEO of Siemens Energy and Automation. And Dennis and I have had numerous conversations around something he deeply believes in, which is what he calls outside-in leadership. And Jen, I've seen him do this in several roles where he asks every member of his C-suite, we're talking several $1 billion in revenue, right? Massive organizations. He asks every one of his C-suite to get out and go see customers, like real paying customers. And I mean, HR and IT and supply chain. I mean, the person who runs his logistics, like the guy's like, I've got more on my plate. It's like, doesn't matter. Those customers are the reasons we're in business. And if we don't culturally build an environment where we get out to the edge of where our business delivers its value and engage those customers. Again, I love his comment about they've got to be real, not some industry event, not some channel partner distributor. I mean, those are important, but go talk to real paying customers and ask them about what they're doing, how they're doing it, not just how we're doing. How are you guys doing? And what's happening in your business? And what are you working on? What are you not working on? And, how's, in this day and age, how's your post-pandemic strategy different than your pre-pandemic? Because if it hasn't changed, I think you missed 2 years of learning and growth opportunities. And then bring that insight back. And what it does is it brings the insight back to really gain alignment with very different parts of the organization, really gain alignment with really distinct product, services, go-to-market strategies that he and his team kind of bring to the table. So that's a lot of what I coach leaders. If the number of the internal meetings and internal focused conversations is greater than your number of external customers, channel partners, buyers, buyer profiles, people at the edge of where your products or services deliver value, if the internal meetings are higher, you got challenges. Because you got to get, and it's not just a sales thing, right? You got to get out, you got to go get in front of customers. You were going to say?
Absolutely. Would you say that leveraging things like customer advisory boards are beneficial, or do you feel that that's too micro-focused?
No. I think they're really valuable. It has to be one data point, because think about it. In a group setting, people may not really want to say what they want to say, which is, sure, you guys were fantastic in the sales process, but you completely dropped the ball after we bought. I mean, we're trying to implement or turn on or get our stuff working. They may not want to say that and you've seen me moderate customer panels, right? It is more, it's more of a controlled environment. It's more of a cautious environment. Nobody likes to make anybody look bad. And you really need that candor. So customer advisory boards should be one data point. But Jen, in my experience, nothing replaces that one-on-one relationship between an executive and your buyer personas. And go validate, go verify, go void the assumptions and assertions you're making about that buyer. and their buyer behaviors. So let me give the audience a really quick example. You and I are working with a couple of internet security clients. And so as such, I've made it a point to get to know, just independent of that, just CISOs, right? Chief Information Security Officers, a lot of these different types of companies. And I was having a conversation one the other day, and I just brought up, hey, listen, how do you evaluate, how do you guys look at kind of new, interesting technologies? And he said, we honestly don't. Because, again, this is a multi-billion-dollar company. He said, my biggest fear is they're not going to be around long enough. And we can't afford to risk our infrastructure and my credibility and our reputation, our industry reputation on some hot whiz bang, no question, batter mousetrap. So I said, then you also can't be completely closed off to it. So how do you guys figure out kind of who's out there and what they're doing? And they've actually set up a separate, almost like a SWAT team that purely looks at new, interesting, engaging, new, specifically cyber, in this case, cybersecurity groups. And they're looking, and they've built a test lab, not their production systems, but a replica, a sampling of that environment in a test lab. And that's where they bring in. Nice. And it was fascinating conversation, because he also talked about giving incredible feedback back to the company of, listen, we're really concerned that you've got 4 engineers because our business alone could overwhelm those engineers overnight. So until you become a little more mature, until you get a little more traction in the market, until you can scale that, we're uncomfortable kind of bringing you in. Does not mean we're not interested. It's just not yet. And I thought that was a fascinating glimpse that I think would be very difficult to get that if you're sitting in your office. So getting out and engaging the customers is really critical. So let me turn it back over to you. Your baseline audit, as you go in, as you work with teams, what do you look for in this second phase, the buyer profiles, the needs, the behavior efforts?
Well, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. And so taking the information that we find from the baseline audit and the foundation, understanding what exists in the database, what is the enrichment strategy, content strategy, all of those things, we can then build a robust profile. And if we don't have the content necessary to support those various profiles, then that's the next, that becomes a task that we then need to create the appropriate collateral to support the profiles. And then beyond that, we also make sure that sales validates what we're looking at and for and doing the right targeting. And they understand that what information marketing then needs to get back from them as they have these conversations to help us fine tune what that looks like. And in early stage companies, it is, you just have to make decisions. Like this is what we think is right. And you make your best guess. And then you have to fine tune as you go. So it is a little bit of trial and error at the very beginning, but as you create more collateral, as you get more insights, as sales has more conversations, you're able to fine tune what that buyer needs and profiles should be. And then also looking at just your web traffic, that can provide great insight into who's maybe looking at your website and your solution and your products, but not clicking and not diving deeper into it. Because if you're losing everybody at the very surface level, you need to fine tune and change your message. Maybe you don't have enough forms, or maybe the first pieces of content they're engaging with are too deep in the funnel and they're not surface level enough. And so looking and analyzing the data is really what we dig into first to then help define what the profiles and behaviors should be.
One of the other things that I saw in your process that you've included is the competitors list. Why is that important in this phase? What are you doing? What are you thinking when it comes to the competitors?
You want to differentiate yourself from your competitors. You don't want to sound the same as they do. And you also don't want to fully focus on why you're better or why you're different. You need to focus on what the end user can get from your solution. And if you happen to be the best solution to solve their problem, then they will more often than not come to you. And you won't have to work as hard to differentiate yourself from your competitors. But at the same time, in most SaaS businesses, your competitors are going to come look at your website. They're going to come download your collateral, and you don't want to spend your cycles sending those people to sales because they're never going to buy. And so it's fine. They can look at and download whatever they want, but don't spend cycles sending them to sales or even putting them into white glove type nurture engagements. You want to keep them sort of siloed off, and you can put them maybe into a nurture engagement track that's all just education and not getting into the weeds or offering free trials or any of that. Because again, your competitors are not going to do anything with that other than gain intelligence about how they can differentiate themselves. So you do need to make sure that you're partitioning your competitors. Don't block them, but partition them off so they don't get deeper into the funnel where they shouldn't be.
For our audience, we're talking about this accelerated time to close process. And specifically, we're in the second phase, if you will, of buyer profiles, needs, behaviors. Jen, when you're leaving so let's say we figured out the personas. We figured out who the buyers are. We figured out our competitive differentiation in the ecosystem, the buying indicators, analyzing and course correcting. You and I have talked about the race is won or lost here with passing of the baton. What are you looking to take from this second phase into the third, which for our audience, by the way, we're going to cover next time, all around user journeys. What's a good handoff from here to the next one?
When you're handing this off, if you are handing from marketing to sales, inform sales on what the person engaged with. Why are they now getting this person's name put in front of them? Did they download a white paper, ask for a demo, have a question? So informing and arming sales with that information will help them have a more intelligent first touch. And then also ensuring sales has appropriate collateral to follow up with. Maybe it is a demo and they schedule a time in the future, but maybe there's a 2-minute high level quick snapshot of, while we're waiting to talk one-on-one, here's a high level thing that you can look at in the meantime. Or maybe it's a thought leadership paper or something, but you never want to leave sales unarmed with additional information that could help the customer in the appropriate way. So passing the appropriate information back and forth is also very important.
So for our audience, again, we're talking about this accelerated time to close process. This session has been really focused on buyer profiles, needs, and behaviors. I would encourage you to check this out in our NOR Forum private online community. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, norgroup.com/forum is a really good place for you to come and learn more about what Jen and her team are doing, what we're doing in the space that might be particularly useful and relevant to you, and how you can benefit from some of these. Jen, in the next session, I'm planning to seed for our audience for the next session, which we're going to go into the user journeys. What should they be looking forward to? What are we going to talk about next time?
Yeah, so next time the user journeys really is what I feel is the fun part. It's defining how do you get them deeper engaged with your solution. And then also we're going to dig into sort of how you identify what those journeys are using your data and analytics and your marketing automation tools. And so it'll be a fun conversation of how to ensure your audience is most engaged with your content.
I can't wait. We also, for our audience, we have several other chief marketing officers and industry kind of luminaries lined up for future episodes. So please make sure you check out NOR Group, NOURgroup.com/podcast. That's where you'll find a list of all of our both current and even a couple upcoming podcast series and episodes. And follow our team on various, we're very active on various social channels. But this has been RevOp. We really focus on accelerating engagement into revenue, accelerating revenue growth. Jen, any final words of wisdom, final insights on the whole buyer profile, buyer space, or the accelerated time to close?
I would say with regard to your buyer profiles and personas, if it's been more than a quarter since you've evaluated, are they working or are they not? I would definitely make time to go back and look at it. And then also ensure that you have the appropriate data in your system, because if you're targeting the same 1,000 customers, because those are the only titles you have, those people are going to get tired of your messaging eventually, and you're not going to get the same level of engagement. So ensure that your buyer personas are tied to an enrichment strategy as well. So again, if it's been more than a quarter, definitely make time to go back and look at that.
Sounds great. So it definitely is not the George Foreman grill of set it and forget it. You got to go back and update. And I love the idea of using data to really understand our assertions, our assumptions. What did we learn? What do we need to modify? What worked in our testing and what didn't? For our audience, that's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. Again, David Noor, Jen Kors, the Noor Group. This is our RevOps practice. We're really focused on helping global clients accelerate, kind of remove traction, remove friction, but also accelerate their journey around that customer lifecycle maturity model that we showed earlier, and in the process, really accelerating their revenue growth. Thanks for joining us. We're live each Tuesday at 11 o'clock Eastern. Hope you'll join us live, as well as catch the recording of these episodes wherever you consume podcasts or on the various social media channels. Until next time, thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.